Good morning. We're very high tech here. My name is Elise Krickow. I am the Senior Vice President of Development at the Maryland Food Bank. Welcome to our fourth Coffee Talk with Carmen, but our first hybrid. So bear with us as we navigate. We have a whole command center. So for the folks dialing in, you can't see, but we got a control station. We're rivaling WBAL here. So, but thank you so much for coming in. I was just saying how great the energy is in the room, how it's great to be together and to convene folks. We are so grateful that you're here as our supporters, both virtually and in this room. You all have made such a difference to help us carry out our mission. We couldn't do this without you, so thank you. Round of applause for our supporters. Today is really an opportunity to convene some of our nonprofit leaders. I'll introduce them momentarily, but we are going to come together and talk about ways that we're partnering with like-minded nonprofits to address food insecurity and its root causes. So I know that you're going to really enjoy this high-level discussion today. So we're really collaborating with the United Way of Central Maryland. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit, but we're just excited to bring this conversation to you all today. So without further ado, I'd like to, actually, with further ado, I want to also just highlight that Kat Thomas is on Zoom. She will be navigating our Q&A for those that are online. So please, if you have questions you want to pose throughout, put it in the Q&A, right, Kat? Not the chat, the Q&A, please. For those of you in the room, I'll be circulating later, and I will be getting your questions. I will be answering those live. So you can consider me Oprah for today, walking around. All right. So to introduce our illustrious guests, I would like to start with Carmen del Guercio, our President and CEO of the Maryland Food Bank, and I'm going to read directly from his bio for you. I don't have it memorized yet. Carmen joined the Food Bank in 2016 after a successful 29-year career in the banking industry. I know, he does not look 29, right? He was compelled to help fulfill the food bank's mission after learning how widespread hunger is in Maryland. Carmen is leading the food bank on an ambitious new movement that is not only feeding more people, but offering solutions that address the root causes of food insecurity. And Franklyn Baker, our guest today, President and CEO of the United Way of Central Maryland. Similarly, Franklyn joined United Way of Central Maryland in 2016 as well, and has served as the president and CEO for the past 7 years. Franklyn has dedicated his career to the nonprofit sector. His previous experience includes leadership roles for both local and national organizations, including Greenpeace USA, Volunteers of America, and Children's National Medical Center. So I want to thank both of you for this conversation today. And as I mentioned, I'd like to kick things off by just talking a little bit about what led you to your respective paths, knowing you both started in 2016. So with that, I'll kick it over to you.
Well, thank you, Elise, and thanks everybody for being here in person. It's just kind of exciting to do this face to face. It's been a minute since that opportunity has presented itself for sure, and I don't think I've ever been introduced as illustrious, so I appreciate that as well. I think that's a compliment. I think I'm going to take it that way, nonetheless. So I want to take this opportunity to thank Franklyn for joining us here today. I think, as Elise mentioned, Franklyn and I started roughly the same time, and so we've been on this journey in terms of our respective organizations, our respective careers, relatively on the same path. And so it's been a great opportunity to get to know Franklyn personally, and I think that's helped us develop good working relationships organizationally as well. And so hopefully that'll come through today in during our conversation. But being a gracious host, I'm going to let you talk first about your journey to where you are here today.
First of all, thank you for sharing the stage. Sometimes there's a concern about, will one person outshine the other, but we never had that challenge. We're just partners in this business, in this space of impact, and so thank you for the stage. So I was born and raised in San Bernardino, California. Went to Howard University for undergrad in business, then went to eventually Notre Dame for a master's in their business school, focused on nonprofit administration. Spent about 30 years in the nonprofit space, as you heard from Elise, primarily focused on impact, organization that really get into the nitty-gritty of how do we make change happen in community. So when this particular opportunity surfaced back in 2016, it was a really good fit. Some of you who know me personally, you know that I have really poured myself into this space and really tried to make change happen in a meaningful way, and really proud of the legacy we're building with the work in partnership with groups like Maryland Food Bank. How do we really just expand the work to make a difference in the lives of people? So glad to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you. You know, it's interesting. I think it was important for us to talk about that because I think how we both got to this place from two different ways. I mean, clearly some of your background extensively in nonprofit spaces, at least referenced. I had a 29-year career. I'm not sure how I would describe it. I don't know if it's successful at times, not so successful. I see some bankers in the audience, so you guys can tell me how well we did. But you know, for me, I will tell you that. Just to back up just for a second. So, not from the area, from Massachusetts, but my parents are Italian immigrants, and so I come from a background of folks who have struggled at times to make ends meet. And I will tell you, though, that I'm not sure that resonated with me as much during my banking career. I did have the luxury of working for a number of nonprofits as a board member during my 29-year banking career and got exposed to the great work that organizations are doing in their communities and really felt that I could play some role in helping an organization reach its potential. But if I'm being totally transparent, I didn't come at this necessarily to solve hunger. I saw an organization that was had a chance to have a significant impact in the communities it serves, and I felt like this was a place that maybe I can add some level of value. And so after 29 years in what my colleagues call the money banking business, I now entered into the food banking business. And
So do you still describe yourself as a recovering banker?
I just call myself, yeah, in more ways than one. Yeah, in more ways than one. So, and it's just been a great journey. And so again, great just to kind of contrast the ways in which we got to the same place, and now two organizations hopefully that are going to continue to do great things together. So I'm going to go off script right out of the gate here, Franklyn, because when we talked about, as we kind of led up to this, you were very eloquent in how you spoke about what motivates you as a leader and you from a United Way perspective. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think what motivates me really is the people. Those who've heard me more than once, I will repeat this until I'm retired, and that is people don't care how much you know. And we have a lot of people in our organization that are dual master's degrees, doctoral candidates, people that are really learned. We create this learning organization, United Way Central Maryland, and I know you do here at Maryland Food Bank. But people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. When I interact with people in community, when I listen carefully in focus groups and one-on-one conversations with individuals who are surviving but not yet thriving, I'm listening with the intent of how do we help this person, right? It's person-centered. It's really focused on how do we really make a difference for this person and their family? How do we layer on services and supports? So that gets me up every single morning, is this sense of purpose, right? The work that we do, and I'm sure this is the same for your organization, is this sense of people coming to the work from a standpoint of avocation primarily than just occupation, right? It is this sense of I've been here planted in this space at this time to make a difference for people, to help them to live their best life on their own terms. So that motivates me every single morning. And there's several people in the audience that I know, so this is repetition. Please don't fall asleep. But it is really important to state that because sometimes leaders come to spaces and they don't really have a heart for the work, right? So my struggle and my challenge every day is trying to convince people, yes, from the heart, but also the head. So it's the head and heart connection. And I like to think of it as sort of start from center, then move to circumference, And if you do that with your team members, you do that with their partners and larger partners, stakeholders, you make a large difference. And I like to think that in these last 7 years, we've made a pretty significant difference with more to come.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, you said that so well prior, I wanted to make sure you had a chance to share that with our audience as well. And going back to my introduction, as I said earlier, I wasn't necessarily focused on solving hunger per se, but taking on this role, the issue of food insecurity is significant in our state, right? 1 in 3 Marylanders are struggling to make ends meet every day. But I would tell you, my 29 years of banking, I didn't see it, right? I just wasn't running in those circles. I wasn't thinking in those ways. And now, during my time here, in my interaction with our partners, interaction with our communities that we serve, I see faces now, and I see the impact that we potentially could have as an organization and communities we serve. And that's similar to you, kind of motivating me and all of us here at the Maryland Food Bank to ultimately become more than just a food distribution organization. We for 44 years or so now have done a tremendous job getting a tremendous amount of food into the communities we serve. But we think and we know that we have an opportunity as an organization to take that relationship, that interaction, and to have a personal connection with somebody that allows us to have a broader conversation about why you're using our food bank services in the first place. And that's where I think our two organizations have the real potential to work together, because you're doing the exact same thing in terms of supports.
That's right. I want to think about the two organizations, complex, growing, stretching, expanding territory, if you will, high levels of trust from government partners, legislative officials, company leaders, people in community. I'm curious from your lens, what does it take to really effectively operate such a complex, highly regarded, but really heavily leaned on organization like Maryland Food Bank? It must be interesting from your perch. And I have a few thoughts myself regarding United Way, but I'd love to hear your.
How much time do we have? I will tell you, coming into this, this organization and this work is much more complex than I think people from the outside probably, I realized coming in. And it really takes a tremendous team of people within our organization, as well as the extension of our organization as it relates to our network partners. And our volunteers. I'll talk about both those in a second. But we are in a position, as I said earlier, to have a significant impact in the lives of people across our state. But we need to be in a position that we understand those needs in a deeper way. And so we rely heavily on our network partners to help us do that. Now, and also what we've started to do organizationally is to rely more heavily on data to help us make those better decisions. And I know your organization has too, and so I want to talk more about that. But so people bringing new ideas, new ways to reach people, getting access to information, whether it's through surveys, whether it's through our network partners giving us feedback, whether it's through our own interaction with neighbors, to begin to put forth programs that we think are, we're agnostic as to the solution in a given community, right? We're really just looking at what does the community need, what does that community need, and what is the best, what arrow can we pull out of our quiver, right, to deploy in that community in a way that has an impact. Because we're sitting here in Halethorpe, it's hard for me to say what the needs are in Pocomoke and that we have the answer for the best solution. And so that adds a level of complexity, to be honest with you, right? Because obviously we can't create customized solutions for every community in our state, but can we use that, as much of that information as we can, to make better decisions? And so coming back to the complexity part, I think we're trying to make a complex operation run as efficiently and effectively as possible, and we do that by using data. So we're deploying the resources in the areas that we think have the greatest impact, and programs that we think to have the greatest reach, and so just trying to match all that up together.
Yeah, so it's so fascinating because you run a single issue organization, right? And there are many throughout our country that really thrive in that space. But over the years, since you've been here, you've moved more into the spaces of what auxiliary services can complement that single issue until hunger ends, right? Whereas United Way of Central Maryland, we have those 4 planks, right? Sort of our baseline for the things we do. So one of them, of course, is this whole space of health, right? Which includes food, and then housing, and economic advancement, and then education. And so for me, when I got here, one of the biggest challenges, talk about complexity, is there was this sort of perception by people who've known United Way for decades as having a sort of primary model, which is take in dollars from lots and lots of companies through the annual campaign that may happen in the fall or the spring, and then really work with all of those other nonprofits to support them, stand them up, build capacity, and spend a small amount of that money on admin, right, and administration, running it. So that was a model that I think and we call that collective impact. So you review in those 4 buckets, how do we do collectively as an organization across our Central Maryland footprint, and that was sort of the value prop for United Way. And many people say, well, you're not now the grandfather's United Way. I mean, you're no longer this sort of organization that I knew decades ago. And so my challenge and complexity of entering this organization was, how do we build upon that sort of long-standing model and create something different that's innovative, that's really tapping the need in community? So our model, in a few sentences now, is, in addition to that, is really scouring the national landscape, as we talked, trying to find best practices that are promising best practices. Southern California, Columbus, Ohio, Dallas, Texas, everywhere, Milwaukee, find best practices, and then figure out where the gaps are in Central Maryland, right? And then work in a co-creative plank with all of our residents, all of our neighbors, and help them to co-create solutions based upon those best practices, and then not replicate. So if some organization is doing some work in a certain part of our region that's effective, making a difference, we don't land in that same region and compete with them. We find a spot where the gap is clearly there, it's not working, the solution is being offered, but we listen carefully to neighbors and residents, co-create solutions, start incubating that best practice for 2, 3, 4, 5 years in some cases. Then we turn that best practice over that's now successful to another nonprofit, stand up the resources for them, help them really build some sustainable impact. Then we take our resources and apply it to another gap, and that process allows us to scale. So we've gone from, and very similar to your story, we've gone from 12 programs in 2016 when I started, supporting about 5,000 lives per year in our Central Maryland region, to now 34 programs, supporting over 30,000 lives per year. And when we add our 211 Maryland helpline, which you use a lot, and your team member use a lot, there's over 100,000 lives that we're impacting every year. Phenomenal change, short window of time, but it was as simple as changing the sort of model of how you approach impact. So I like to say there is profundity in simplicity, right? Often that's the case, is there's a level of complexity that can be found in something very direct and simple, but now we've been doing it for some time, we figured out a rhythm, you know, and that's what's interesting, is you can take two models, single issue wraparound, multi-issue wraparound, and find success and make impact happen. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think this is why this conversation is important to share. Because I think to our two organizations, our paths are crisscrossing now much more so than we have been historically. And I think to the extent that we can demonstrate that kind of partnership, that kind of relationship, that's something hopefully that other organizations across the state can begin to do as well. Because I think there's real power in this nonprofit space in terms of organizations who might be more open, coming into relationships more kind of, we talk about palms open, right? And coming into relationships with not really having to own a particular solution or own a particular community in a way that just thinks more broadly about the impact we have. And I think hopefully by our conversation today demonstrating a little bit of that, but us continuing to work together going forward, I think hopefully sends a good model for that as well. So, so thanks for saying that. What are some things specifically you guys are doing these days that we want to share with our audience?
Well, I think there's a lot of differences between Maryland Food Bank and United Way Central Maryland, but there are some similar approaches as well, right? And we have, as I said, 34 programs. So I'll just highlight two initiatives that I think speak to this whole space of innovation. One is Changemaker Challenge. Some in the audience watching and in the presence physically may be aware. It started in 2017 with a few partners. It really is sort of a Shark Tank light, if you will, but a friendlier version of just giving people an opportunity that are nonprofit leaders, small and mid-sized nonprofits, an opportunity to showcase, hey, here's some innovation in helping the environment, or some innovation with education, or whatever the issue area they're trying to address. And we give them a platform. We have judges. I've been a judge a few years as we've been doing
Are you
this.
Mark Cuban? Or Mr. Wonderful. Yeah, Mr. Wonderful.
That's right. So we give them a chance to showcase, this is specifically how I will make an impact in this community with this particular innovative idea. And we have been issuing up to $25,000, some cases $50,000 on the winners. So the last three Changemaker challenges, we have actually issued somewhere around $1.5 million to about 50-ish winners. So it's phenomenal to track their ability to take those winnings from United Way in a video that we helped them co-create, right? And then they're able to actually sort of leverage that for further engagement with foundations and government grants, et cetera. So having that experience is more than just sort of winning money to impact in community. It's now serving as a propellant for them to sort of accelerate their ability to bring in more support so they can actually be more impactful. So that's one example. I guess the other one, which I'm really, really excited about, is this whole need to really help neighbors and residents to become more empowered. We studied, talking about best practices, we studied this system in Southern California through St. Joseph's Health System. They've been doing this for over 20 years, where essentially they work with different communities. And they showed us the map, and they went to some of the cities as well. where the actual residents now are so empowered. So that politically, they know who their senator is, their delegate. They know exactly how to pull the levers on what issue areas should be elevated. They know exactly how to work with their city hall or their council members. They're advocates, they're champions for their neighborhood. So we took that approach, tailored it for Central Maryland, called it Neighbors United. And my vision for this, Carmen, we talked about it. My vision for this is so in several years from now, we have thousands of Neighbors United champions working across multiple issue areas, including food, where they have this sense of what's needed in my community. It could be as small as we need speed bumps. You know, the speed bumps have eroded or they're no longer effective, or they're none at all. Right. Or it could be, you know, we have so many of our schools in our neighborhoods that don't have enough supplies, you know, so that teachers are having to reach into their pocket to support the students. Or it can be larger things, you know, changes that need to be made, like food insecurity. Let's stand up some sort of small grocery stores or some sort of community center where it provides a host of different services, including food, maybe at a large discount. So these neighbors, residents, which is amazing, we've already gone through 3 communities. We have a nonprofit agency, a coach assigned to help them. So they have 4 years to really go through the process. And after the 4 years, they're independent. Then we take the same approach and apply it to 3 other neighborhoods. So we're now on our second tranche, and proud of the fact, we had a celebration for them. We're proud of the fact that they were sharing all the things they tackled. They created their own strategic plan for their neighborhoods. And so they're now champions. So our vision is in, say, 3 years or 4 years to have kind of this big celebration and talk about how can these hundreds of residents become part of a broader movement of residents across Central Maryland that are standing up for issues they care most about. And they're armed and equipped to make a difference without the help of organizations like us after some window of time, right? So those are just 2 things from an innovation standpoint, thinking outside the box, but meeting a need that United Way has sort of leaned into. And I know you guys have doing some really fascinating stuff.
Well, I mean, again, every time you talk, I think about the things that we do very similarly, right? And so we've been involved in grant making now at a much more elevated level over the last couple of years, in a way, because what I said earlier about the complexity of the business is we need to have a network, or a network of organizations we're working with who are even more effective than they currently are in their given communities, right? And thinking differently and more broadly about the supports they're providing. And so we've extended millions of dollars over the last few years, including a couple $1 million this year, standing up and providing grants for organizations for traditional food distribution needs, racking, refrigeration, trucks, those things that we think are still critically important. But we've also expanded our grant making to organizations, including yourselves, as we're giving grants to you, believe it or not. So we're coming the other way. But
don't forget about
it's public now. You got to come back the other way. But it's on record. But organizations who are solving bigger, more root cause problems. I mean, you talked about us being a single issue, which is true. It's that single issue that is bringing people into our network every day. And so for us to then be talk about what are some of these other root causes, how can we help organizations share this vision with our network out there and help those organizations do that kind of work, because it's new. And so, this again is talking about best practices. Hopefully we're sharing best practices with them and helping those organizations achieve greater impact in their respective communities, both financially as well as other supports.
So how did the pandemic, because I mean the audience, I'm sure they're thinking about, how did the pandemic change your game? It changed ours. I'd be curious to know, like, what we're thinking about differently now because of what happened with the pandemic, and how does it affect your work going forward?
Yeah, it's interesting because the pandemic, is in terms of crisis response, right? The need was shot up to levels hasn't really come down, but we were all about response. And so going back to adding complexity to the organization, we introduced a number of new ways in which we can reach more and more neighbors, right? Home delivery became something we really didn't do historically. We introduced this concept of a mobile market, which is a smaller vehicle going into more harder to reach communities, right? So it forced us to be innovative. It forced us to be more agile, to use terms that became very popular during those times. But so it was all about response. And I think now, as we kind of come out of that, right, and realizing, that's getting further and further in our rearview mirror. Now, how do we begin to come back around to Just focus on some of the root causes and begin to address, this notion of ending hunger, right? To begin to address the challenges that the communities are facing. We started that journey pre-COVID, paused it a bit during COVID, and now are re-energizing it, right? And the learnings that we came out of it is, one is that that's still the right path to take. Right. We clearly think that that's. But I think one of the things that came out of that, Franklyn, and it goes back to what you were talking about with regard to your neighbor approach, is to really integrate neighbor voice into our programmatic response more. Mm-hmm. That is something that we've done more of, and we continue to do more of, in a way that begins to influence the program we provide. It begins to influence identifying other supports that community needs. Again, one community might be very different than another. Yeah. It influences the type of product we distribute, in terms of nutritional content as well as culturally preferred. So it's allowing us to, it's opened our eyes to the fact that while we rely heavily on our network and they are incredibly invaluable parts of our business model, we need to continue to find ways to integrate neighbor voice so that we can begin to make sure that the actions we're taking and the solutions we're providing are those that are coming from the community, similar to what your program just described, right? And we're providing what the community wants and needs, as opposed to, again, us trying to assess that from where we sit.
I think what it did for us is, to your point, is there were several things that we were not doing either at scale or not quite in the same way, level of intensity, level of partnership, that it forced us into spaces and places we weren't in before.
Absolutely.
So prior to the pandemic, we had never really leaned heavily into eviction prevention. So we stood up this program called STEPS, Strategic Targeted Eviction Prevention. Long and short is we partnered with so many partners across the state, and we were able to keep over 15,000 households in their apartments, in their homes, right, and not get evicted.
Awesome.
But then secondly, this whole notion of how do we make sure that we're getting money out fast and quickly? So we used a landlord-facing approach, which we hadn't been using before, versus a tenant-facing approach, which was very case-by-case centric. So that allowed us to get money out from the feds. So it's over $100 million we're able to leverage through the feds to help keep those 15,000 households securely housed. But what's interesting is we had never really been into the whole mental health space. Under our health plank, we had never really been a lot into the mental health space. So we start partnering with lots of mental health partners, pro bono counseling services, et cetera, and being able to distribute mental health kits during this time where people were very nervous, frantic about, hey, what should I be looking at now? Which particular, is it Pfizer? Is it, this whole series of questions, anxiety was really high for people, students. And then this digital divide space. Yeah. We had never done anything in that space. So we worked with several partners to really make sure that over 17,000 households in South Baltimore were able to take advantage of those Wi-Fi hotspots that were placed on churches, hospitals, so they can get quality, free, accessible Wi-Fi to do their schooling well, right, with the parents. So it has produced this sense of our work, and in many ways your work too, is providing what's needed where it's needed. Yeah. Right. And sometimes when it's needed.
Exactly.
So it's a very fascinating thing when some sort of major calamity happens, right? It forces us to think differently about our work and how do we impact community. And so I think going forward, to your earlier point, going forward, we really want to lean more into that.
Right.
How we're assessing the ways in which we're providing age-old services in a way that's fresh, impactful, customized, right? And taking into account the actual needs of the residents and neighbors we're supporting.
Exactly. Well, and you use the term hotspots, so I want to hit on that for a little bit, and this could be a nice segue into you talking about Alice, because Alice is a pretty important data point that I think has influenced a lot of our work. But going back to how we distribute food, so historically, I think one of the things that we've learned along the way is that we've tended to look at it at more of the county level, right? And we would distribute food in a given geography a little. I don't want to make it too simplified, but kind of spreading like peanut butter, right? And so, so one of the things, the shifts that we've made is we've created this kind of regional approach to our work, where we have dedicated resources in these regions to understand their needs in a deeper way. Right. Then we overlay data points to then begin to identify pockets within those counties where the needs are greatest. And so we're not blinded by the fact that we might be distributing a significant amount of food in a given geography, thinking we're doing a great job, and realizing there's communities in there that we're underserving or haven't reached as effectively. And so we've created this hunger hotspot. We've identified hunger hotspots using data like Alice, using data like unemployment claims, using data like nearest grocery stores and access to foods, to begin to be much more targeted right, in the communities in which we are focused on. And that's not at the expense of other communities that may not be considered a hotspot, but it's an and, right? And so how do we begin to think about those communities to kind of to gin that up a notch or two to ensure that we are giving it the attention we need because of our better understanding of the fact that that need in that community. And when I say community, we're talking zip code, we're talking neighborhoods, right? We're not talking about Baltimore City as a community, right? And so I think that's been an important shift for us, where our regional approach and our reliance on data and our much more kind of focused and intentional way on the communities that we serve. And that allows us to take a deeper dive, to understand the needs in a bigger way. And so again, making sure that we're putting the right food in the right way at the right time with the right partners.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's
It takes the
exciting.
right leader to identify it.
Well, the team.
But I would say, I mean, in terms of Alice, I mean, most people in the audience, physically and online, time check for us, so we're good.
Okay, thank you.
Most people in the audience and online understand, or at least have heard of, the term Alice. You know, and for those who haven't, it's asset limited, income constrained, employed. So much of our decades of existence, we've been around for 98 years. You've been 44, 98 years. Celebrate our 100th anniversary in 2025. But for most of that time, we have been really focused on the poverty stricken.
Yeah.
You know, so we see on our website some years back where it's a lot of pounds of delivery, working with Maryland Food Bank to get into communities to serve and support those who don't have the wherewithal to afford food, right?
Right.
But it's that and the people who are working, right? And by the way, they're not the working poor, because some people replace Alice with the terminology working poor. That's not true. These are people who have a household, both in many cases are working, mom and dad is working, they just are working one or two low-wage jobs.
Right.
So they don't earn enough to keep pace with the state's high cost of living.
Right.
So that is the challenge for us as the United Way and a lot of organizations like yours as well, where, yes, don't bypass those who are in poverty,
Right.
who are 100% FPL, federal poverty level, but those people who are 200 and 300, up to 400% of the FPL, those are people who are really struggling.
Yeah.
So right now in the state, 2.3 million households, 860,000 of which are Alice. 38% of the households in Maryland are working hard, just can't afford to keep pace with the state's high cost of living. So much of our, efforts are centered around how do we take that population who are only, and this is a stretch, only surviving, to get them to go from surviving to thriving. Like many of us in the audience are. We're in positions where, and it takes, just in Baltimore City, $73,000 for a family of 4 to be just surviving, right? It doesn't mean that you're eating FDA-approved meals or you have money to put away for your college,
Right.
and the 529 plan, B plan, or none of those things, right? Go on vacations, have money for clothes that are decent material. You know what I mean? This is just basic survival. And so when you get into other parts of the counties in Maryland, the number's higher, maybe 89,000, maybe 87. So this sense of how do we work together as partners, right, to make sure we're creating roadmaps for people.
Yep.
So they can go from $20 an hour. In fact, this is an interesting stat. The last Alice report, based upon 21 data, which includes the pandemic, right? 51% of the jobs in Maryland, people are earning $20 an hour or less.
51%.
51% of the workers in Maryland, right? Just think about what that means. That just literally means it's very hard for those individuals to do the basic things like childcare.
Right.
Right? That it's hard to think about health and do I actually pay the premium,
Right.
or do I just take a chance, right? So part of our work is how do we make sure that the interventions are aligned well? Right. And the Alice data is one set. The 211 Maryland helpline has been around for some years now, which is doing very, very well. But it's also a source of decision making for us.
Yes, exactly.
Let's take an example, like you say, some of you might nod your head like, wow, that's interesting. Some years ago, we started getting a lot of calls for eviction prevention and homelessness issues in Cockeysville, of all places. And if anyone knows the area, fairly high wealth index, right? But there are some apartments that are scattered here and there in that region. We started getting a high volume of calls. And we had to say, look, we can't ignore this. We sent a caseworker out to sort of survey the land, if you will. And then we needed to embed a caseworker as a part of our family stability program to see 30 families per year. And what's happened is that data becomes so predictive for us, right? And it's a catalytic to help us to make smart decisions on where to apply resources. So we are a learning, as we talk, we are a learning organization. It is important to, if you're going to fail forward, fail fast, fail often, but learn from it at the base. Learn from what you're missing. Like you had a project that was 12 milestones, you only hit 10.
Right.
Don't feel like the sky is falling and pull
pull
the stun of, hey, I'm done. I'm no longer working with the organization because I failed. It's this sense of what did you learn? Who wasn't at the table? Who should have been included? What partners didn't you seek advice on? Did you listen to residents? So all of those things are markers of a healthy organization when you get people to recognize learning is most important.
No, I appreciate it. I wanted you to talk about Alice a little bit because I think it's been kind of transformational in a lot of ways. I think it's opened, well, first of all, as I said earlier, we're using it internally as far as helping us inform us to where the needs are across our greater Baltimore as well as the state. But also, what I appreciated about it, it began to educate the state about the challenges that families are facing, right? And so your numbers that you're referencing in terms of number of households are exactly aligned with the data we look at in terms of 38% of Marylanders are having a hard time making ends meet. And so those are very consistent. And it puts, I think it changes the perspective of the neighbors that we're serving, right? And I think people may have historically tended to think that we were serving probably the poverty level and below, and the reality is yes, but the reality is that we're serving a whole host of people beyond that. And
the other thing I wanted to mention, though, because for the audience they may not recognize, and I know we're probably getting close to time at least, but what we have seen since we've been doing the Alice promotion, if you will, since 2017 is there are a lot of legislative changes that have happened, specifically focused on the Alice population. So being in Annapolis, being in, I have right now Senator Cardin, he was visiting one of our family centers in Columbia, Maryland, and he says, I can't stop quoting chapter and verse, your Alice report, right? That is so important because what that means is they're looking through a lens that's specifically focused on that cohort. But you have colleges, Hartford Community College a couple years ago, they changed their eligibility criteria from sort of FPL base to Alice base. So the people who are eligible for scholarship assistance or getting enrolled into a program, they've expanded their view of who really is eligible.
That's my point.
For this particular point, right? So there's a role for all of us to play in trying to elevate support to that population.
Absolutely, yeah. So congrats on the impact that's having on the entire network of nonprofits being offered as well. And I'm going to give you a couple of business cards, so when you interact with these politicians, you just slip this in your hands, because it seems like somewhere we don't get people. He was talking about being a governor's office, mansion and stuff. It's like we just sit in this little humble place in Hillthorpe here. I never get the chance to do that. So just slip a couple of those cards and when you're talking, remember your friends. So. Do we want to shift to Q&A? Yes? No? Maybe?
Any closing remarks you'd like to make before we get going?
Can I just say one thing, Elise? I think, regardless of your sort of political persuasion in the audience, online and in person, I tend to agree with the governor's sort of view of the future for the state, right? This sense of this is our decade, leaving no one left behind. We're at a function this week I was sharing with you earlier with his wife, the First Lady of Maryland, and she spoke at the governor's mansion.
Of course.
It was phenomenal to hear her talk about her and her husband and the governor's team are relentlessly committed. And this really helps us as leaders, relentlessly committed to finding ways to partner, the public-private partnership, in ways that we have not done before, right? And gave many examples. And the whole notion of it would please me as a legacy, and I know it would you, Carmen, if we look back 10 years from now and say, across a host of indices that we all track, that we made not just marginal improvement, we made some substantive, sustained improvement across a number of indices that makes us feel like, we made a real substantive difference. And that sets up leaders coming behind us to do the same, right? To sort of serve as a propellant, for them, accelerator, if you will, for them. And that would be my hope, is like, how do we work together with partners to leave no one behind,
Yep.
to work together in a way that we've not, to set aside egos. You
Right.
know. There's this sense, and I hate it, there's this sense of scarcity mentality as opposed to abundance. There's not about competition. There's so much need, and there's just a way that we can work in a collaborative way
Right.
to really make a difference working together, right? And Governor Moore came up with this slogan, which is so innovative. We were at a volunteer event together. He said, you know what? If we work together, or if we are united, we can't lose. But if we're divided, we can't win.
We can't win. Yep.
And that is a beautiful way to summarize our partnership together.
Yep.
Other partners we can work together is if we're working in tandem, and we'll be transparent. We're on a third dreaming session.
Yes.
That's coming up. Maryland Food Bank, United Way Central Maryland, on how can we see the future different together and work in ways we've never worked together before. So I would just end with that.
Not sure how I topped that.
No competition. No need to-
Yeah, but I'm not going to try. You're talking about the state. Now, I just want to publicly acknowledge the role the state has played in terms of supporting our organization. It's been tremendous, and especially during the pandemic, and it's continued beyond that. And so I know Governor Moore, you're watching this, so thank you. And I'm looking forward to my invitation to the event. But I think you're right on. I think from when I was in my time with the bank, I happened to sit on our foundation, and as organizations were approaching M&T Bank for donations, you found that you can see organizations twisting their request to try to differentiate one organization from another, right? Well, that's not terribly productive. Right. And so I think I came into this naively thinking that maybe there's an opportunity for us to bring more organizations working together. And I think we've had some success there, but I think there's a lot more room to go. And I think to continue to kind of preach that from your perspective, I preach it from mine, hopefully as other individuals do interact with, to find creative ways to work together, because I think there's an opportunity. Yeah. We see it every day. Community-based organizations, we got some of them here today, are doing great work in their communities, right? They need help. Whether it's dollars, they need expertise, they need, and there's ways to create synergies that can really make 1 + 1 = 3. And I think that's really the opportunity that we have, we're both of us as leaders, as well as just leaders of these organizations, to make that happen, because we have networks that we work with every day. And so to find those partnerships and help create those partnerships, I think can really be a great opportunity for us. So well said. With that.
Am I good? All right, thank you. Oh, good. We're clamoring for questions. This is great. Why don't you please speak into this little tiny microphone?
Sure. My name is Vicki Schultz. I'm the Executive Director at Maryland Legal Aid. I know some of you here in the room. And, one of the quotes that I really like from Brian Stevenson is he talks about, the opposite of poverty is justice. And that really is sort of a North Star for us. We run a statewide legal services program, one of the largest law firms in the state, actually, but we serve people who are experiencing poverty, and we provide free legal services for their most fundamental needs. And really, we're very adjacent to the work that you are doing, because we are really interested in helping people not only stabilize, as you said, but really get on the path to thriving.
Right.
But often what people face, and they don't know it, is that they've got a legal problem. Yeah. Maybe it's housing stability, they're facing eviction, maybe they need to get away from a situation of domestic violence, something very elemental, or it's just economic issues. They need to be able to get a job, and they need their records expunged, or something else to be able to remove those critical barriers. Yeah. So I really wanted to get in right away, because I appreciate your comments about partnership.
Yep.
I think it is an all, it's all inclusive. We like to think of it as holistic lawyering, holistic problem solving. When people come to us, to your point of contact, I'd really like to hear from you about how we do a better job of coordinating, because people in crisis come through whatever door they need. They're scrambling. They're in a situation, they're in a desperate situation, and we want, when we get those points of contact, we want to be effective in solving their problems and really getting them onto that pathway. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about how we can do a better job in collaborating with one another and bringing in all of the critical services, including legal services, to really rectify those situations.
Well, Vicki, we could have let you talk further because, you know, United Way, 211 and Legal Services, we just had a wonderful partnership we secured, and we had never done that before. So this sense of leading into that, we're learning organization. We dropped the ball a few places because we just had never faced this partnership before, but it's a sensible partnership, right? Having legal support with eviction prevention and housing issues and giving people wherewithal legally so they're well equipped to go through the process, not fearful, but very confident they can get through this well. It starts with that. It starts with, to your point, it starts with being willing, being courageous, being fearless, right, around making sure that we pair up with organizations that can help us to take our impact to another level. So.
Yeah, I think it starts with conversations, right? Understanding the ways in which you're approaching our communities maybe helps as you're interacting with some of your neighbors to be able to understand how we might be able to provide supports and vice versa, right? You know, as I'm thinking through this a little bit, you know, the issue of food insecurity, someone comes to our organization, one of our network partner organizations, because they're hungry, right? But, and that's kind of the tip of the spear. And what we're trying to figure out is what's kind of behind that so that we can begin to provide those other services. You're a little opposite in the sense that there's a specific issue that someone's dealing with legally, right? So it doesn't have as much of the kind of critical mass. When we look at these communities and say, what's the pervasive underlying challenge in this community? Is it transportation? Is it access to health care, what have you? So it's a little different. It's a little different approach, but I think nonetheless is an important one because, you know, for us to, because there could be underlying barrier that someone's facing that is very legal oriented. And so how do we begin to make sure that people know what services you provide? Our teams and our partner network knows those services. So I think it's starting a conversation to figure out ways in which we could get the services of your organization into the communities that we serve to the extent that it's not already. And then for you all, as you're interacting one-on-one with various families, that to know that they have other supports that might be available to them. And I think it just starts with just understanding how do you approach your work and what kind of interactions you have and how we can complement that and how you can complement our services. Because again, talking about mobile markets, right? We go in these communities, in addition to food distribution, we try to bring another solution with us. And again, a solution that's relevant to that community. Right. And so I don't think, I'm going to say this, I'm not sure we've ever brought legal services as one of those partners, but I don't see why that should be something we should consider, right? Certainly in certain communities. So I appreciate you asking the question. I think it's just something correct, right? And that's exactly what we're trying to.
We're really looking for impact as well.
Yeah.
We have an obligation and a duty to represent individuals living in poverty, but it's critical to also understand the systems
Right.
and the challenges within the system so that we can make change on a broader level.
Right.
And so those are areas too where I think we could partner more directly.
And it's about relationship and trust, right? Again, that's what our network is able to do in their communities, so that as we talk more broadly and people hopefully open themselves up to other challenges they're facing, they're not going to do that with a stranger. So when you've done something to support that family, to help them through a legal issue, you've built a bond, you've built a relationship that allows you to be an advisor and help them see other opportunities to succeed. And I think we want to interact with organizations who build those relationships so we can have broader conversations. So I think there's a lot of alignment there. So thank you for raising
I just wanted to add a word that we haven't really explicitly said, which both of us are working on respectively, is this word of equity. Because at United Way of Central Maryland, we promote equity. So that is in our hiring practices, who we put on our board, what images we have on our website, what language we use in partnership with residents, who do we hire for catering and other vendor services. It is very important because what happens is people with lived experiences that they're close to, they can make the attachment with legal services, food insecurity, housing, because for some, housing is health.
Right.
Right? So this sense of making sure that we're looking through every aspect of our life, and our work life especially, through that lens of equity, it really makes a difference in terms of decision making, et cetera. It's just so important, which is why I think we came at the legal partnership so effectively, is because we were looking through that prism. It's equitable for a person who's facing a legal challenge to can't afford the legal cost, right? And who's really being referred from 211 into a place where they can get support, to have the same experience that I have, right? That's really important. So I think just that principle of looking at through services and delivery from the equitable lens is really, really critical. Yeah.
Okay, we have some questions online as well, so I want to make sure we get to some of those. And we have one about wraparound services primarily. And the question is, what partners are you looking or lacking or seeking to help with comprehensive wraparound?
Did you say hunger?
What
was the last part?
Comprehensive wraparound services.
So what partners are we lacking?
Other resources. Yes, what are we lacking in terms of wraparound resources that we could be providing to the people we serve?
You want to
Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer for that question, frankly. I think, again, our whole regional approach, and I say that from the perspective of, I think it varies from community to community. And I think our regional approach, I would be honest in that, we went into that work thinking, well, we can create a whole menu of potential services to support the given state, right? Well, that is a very difficult thing to manage, right? And so we've started to migrate more towards financial security, economic mobility, right? And so how do we create situations for folks to be able to provide for themselves and their families? And so that support to help that family, that individual do that might look different, our friends in Anne Arundel County versus another part of our state. And so I think it's a question, it's difficult for me to answer because I think the answer, it depends. and it depends on the community in terms of who we should be interacting with, what services are necessary, and how do we begin to provide those services in a way that people feel that there's a dignity to that, right? And then there is a very personal relation to that, as opposed to something we're just throwing out there as kind of well go figure it out. There's a notion of hand-holding. There's a notion of kind of helping shepherd somebody through a process and things like that. So it's not as if we just want to offer a service and walk away. And so,
I agree with you. Your point that it is certainly variant by situation, but I think to the person's question, a lot of the services that we're offering, there is some wraparound component. Some require a bit more wraparound, like our family centers that we have, early education, childhood centers, one in South Baltimore, West Baltimore, and now Columbia that we opened up last fall. All of those have multiple partners, right? So yeah, the core is childcare and helping these youngsters from 8 weeks to up to 5 years old to get well poised when they go into preschool. They can be at the front of their class and frontal lobe stimulated so well from all the stimulation activity and care that they end up thriving. But wrapped around that is a host of other things.
Yeah.
Food stuff. In fact, in South Baltimore now, that one's the longest serving. We have over 80 different partners. The one in West Baltimore now to 35 partners, the one in Columbia around 12 partners. So over a period of time, you start broadening
you identify the needs.
partnerships and the need, and you're co-creating what's needed.
Right.
So yeah, that's a very important question though, because you can't approach any of these issues sort of in a singular approach.
Right.
It's got to be wraparound. Yeah.
Great. I just wanted to get a couple questions. I saw Leah's hand first, and then you.
Just hold it. Okay, this is my first time with this. Hi, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. I'm Leah Paley. I'm the CEO of the Anne Arundel County Food Bank. I was really excited to hear about what United Way, and I was very familiar with what Maryland Food Bank is doing because we partner regularly with Maryland Food Bank at the micro level when it comes to advocacy and empowering our neighbors. I'd love to hear more about what your organizations are doing at a more macro level in terms of your advocacy. What is your legislative approach? How are you speaking? What are you saying? What are those conversations with state and maybe even federal if you're having, Senator Cardin, those conversations? Because I was thinking about the Department of Ag report that came out last night, specifically around food security, and seeing an increase, which I'm sure is directly tied to the federal funding trickling out, and of course with the SNAP benefits and the expansion ending. So seeing that we're kind of headed back towards where we were, just in terms of the funding or lack thereof that was available during the pandemic, what is the approach that your organizations are taking to ensure that we don't continue to have that increase in food insecurity, which was reported for 2022?
Fellow Providence College. I got a shout out. I got a little shout out, Friars. Okay. Very intelligent question. Liberal arts education. Sorry, now go ahead.
I was just going to say, first base for us, and you might be in the same boat, is making sure that mid-November government shutdown doesn't happen. because that's the trigger for a lot of these things to stop flowing, the dollars to stop flowing. So if we can rally around, when I was meeting with him at the center, and I said, I know that your friend, Chris Van Hollen, is on the Appropriations Committee, so please pass on the word. He said, no, I'm going to tell him to come visit this site. Because what he said was, the last several decades I've been involved in this work, different levels in government. I've not seen a comprehensive approach to early childhood development like you have at this center, right? And his remarks were important because we're trying to seek dollars from him and his office and others in the state for appropriations or earmarks. But his point is, no, the stories that you're telling, because we're lifting stories of actual parents who are Alice parents, who are bringing in little Tommy and little, Tanya, bringing them into the center, telling stories around why this is so important to have affordable, reliable, quality child care for them. It's the storytelling that really, really is so pivotal. And we've been learning that painfully. And Chris, Oven, who's in the audience, he was a former board member. He knows the journey a little bit, and it's so important for us to get to a place where we're telling stories very effectively around how lives are changed as a direct result of the impact, because that moves legislators quicker than anything else, right? When they can grab a story and then start basically sharing that story on the floor,
Right.
right, or in convenings,
Right.
right?
So for us, frankly, 5 or 6 years ago, we really weren't in the advocacy space. We relied on other organizations to advocate on our behalf, and we felt like our role was to primarily just be, serving food in the communities. But we've changed our direction on that in a big way, because it's important for us to be able to have a voice and share. When you talk about sharing stories, so the step we've taken when we established a speakers bureau, right, where we have worked with folks with lived experiences to train them about feeling comfortable sharing their stories in public settings, compensating for their time in that as well, and then having them tell their stories when we go to Annapolis or other places so that they hear it directly. It's not going to mean as much coming from a Franklyn or from Carmen in terms of what that means. It's going to mean a lot more from somebody saying, here's what I experienced, here's what my neighbors around me are experiencing, and I think those can be much more impactful. So I think bringing that aspect into our advocacy efforts, and then 2, think about advocating for more things beyond just food legislation, right? So things that kind of lift families up, whether that's access to other services, whether that's related to some tax credits and things like that. So thinking more broadly about the drivers to food insecurity and how do we begin to champion and advocate for those at the state level is a big focus of ours as well, and one we're going to actually increase our efforts around, because we think the state can play a significant role in terms of helping us on this journey. So good question.
Kat, can I be unmuted? Thank you. We have time for one more question, and we're going to go with Chip, who is our wonderful volunteer here at the Maryland Food Bank. I want to put a plug for our volunteer program. But Chip, here you go.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Chip Hebler. I'd like to thank you both for the time that you've spent with us today talking about your programs. And as a volunteer, we hear the word food insecurity and food desert tossed around daily. But as a volunteer during the pandemic, I worked with Middle Mile, and I had a chance to actually pick up food from donors and take it directly to communities, to community food banks, to homeless shelters, to places that distribute food. You talked about the community. The thing that I noticed as a volunteer is where those pantries are located. It's terrific for the 2 or 3 blocks that surround that area. That's great. There are other people in the greater community, and that could be a half a mile away, that don't know about those food pantries, that don't know about those services that we're providing as volunteers, that don't know the commitment that the food bank and the United Way is making to make sure that at least that segment of the population is fed. What resources can you round up to expand that into the greater community, even if that community is just West Baltimore or South Baltimore or East Baltimore, but more than just Stricker Street, where the pantry is located?
Sure. One of the things that we've tried to ramp up, Chip, is, and thanks for the question, because it's an ongoing challenge, it really is this notion of promoting 211. putting 211 on billboards, on, like bus stations where they have those signs that as soon as people get on the bus, they see the signs. More on TV, radio. Like a lot of my interviews is just about 211, right? Because there's over 7,500 resources that are available to the callers. It's over 120, depending on the year. Like during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, it was 4 times the call volume, normal call volume. But it is this notion of if a person who's a resident, and by the way, Chip, there were many people, and it brought me to tears in some cases, right? You're standing there, you're talking to someone in the pantry line in a church or a community center or some other place, and they'll tell you what happened with the pandemic. They had never in 30 years, never been in a line to go get a box of food or turkey or, you know what I mean? And I'm having to now humble myself, and just deal with that, right? So some of those people had never heard of 211, for example. It was word of mouth. They just heard someone, hey, the church down the street or, 2 miles from here, they're offering. So if we can that's just one. I mean, there's so many solutions, but that's one solution is elevating what 211 offers, where the location, because when they call, they'll tell them, hey, zip code 21, here's 3 locations. They'll tell them that. And how to get there, what bus route, et cetera. So it's trying to promote that in a way where people see it as a resource and they value. We have what we call our frequent flyers, the 211. So it's like a right arm cousin. I mean, it's anything I need. I'm at 1 a.m. because it's 24/7. 1 a.m. whatever. That's just one solution.
But they
Maybe
need to know it
they
in
do.
order to
call.
use it.
Yeah.
They've
To
gotta
call.
know it.
Then-
And I love the
yeah.
idea of putting up signs on buses and
Absolutely.
public transportation. And we're the people.
Takes
that
money,
really
though.
need it.
It takes-
Of course.
Yeah.
Hey,
So
I'll
trying to
put up
decide.
signs. I got a favor.
There you go.
What's it gonna take?
Yeah, and I know we're kind of cutting tight, but I want to also chip, and then thank you again all for your volunteerism as well. I talked earlier, I want to touch upon it, that our volunteers are critical to our mission and our ability to do the kind of programming we do is because we got people who are helping us do the day-to-day activity. We started something earlier this year. I think we've had 2, maybe now 3 rounds, what we call partner convenings, where we're just trying to bring all the partners in a given geography. And when I'm saying that, it's a relatively modest geography, because what we realize is that one organization doesn't know what another organization is doing in that community. When are you open? What are the services you provide? Who are you serving? And so how do we begin to get these groups to begin working together so they're complementing each other? Like, why would 2 people be open for the exact same hours, right? Or realizing that there's a service that I don't provide, but that this organization a mile down the road provides. And so trying to do that in a very kind of a local area approach so there's easy access for those neighbors as they go. And so these convenings have been incredibly eye-opening about the lack of kind of just cohesiveness, communication, cooperation, not because they don't want to cooperate, they just haven't had the opportunity to do so, right? So I think that's been a very powerful and kind of eye-opening exercise to say, that really there isn't the network we have, as proud as we have, I think there's an opportunity for that to be much more aligned in a way that we know, that we're not duplicating efforts and we're leveraging that as best we can. So that's been an initiative of ours that I think is critical to doing exactly what you're just talking about. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. And I know we didn't get to all the questions online, but we are tracking those and we'll respond. So just want to make sure our friends virtually get their questions answered as well. But I want to say thank you. This was such a great conversation. I think we could have kept going, which is a good thing, right? But we are going to keep that going with our dreaming sessions together. But I want to thank all of you for coming out today. I want to thank those of you who have dialed in virtually. We're going to continue to have more coffee talk, so keep an eye out. We'll have more volunteer opportunities as well. And for those of you that are here today, we do have complimentary coffee talk with Carmen mugs. So for those of you online, come next time. So you may get a mug. But we also have some great materials that we will send out as well to those of you virtually. We have our donor impact report. We want you to know how your giving is moving the needle on how we're addressing food insecurity throughout the state. And so please take some of these materials as you leave. Also, hot off the presses, just opened the box 2 days ago, our fall newsletter, which really does share stories of folks and how they're facing food insecurity as well. So I just want to thank you, Franklyn, for coming out today. It was a great conversation. And thank you all for your ongoing support of the Maryland Food Bank, and I'm sure also the United Way of Central Maryland. So thank you.